Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Yeah, it kind of shoots me in the foot a little bit, because whenever I struggle with an answer, I say, well, you've got to go and find yourselves a real rabbi like Rabbi Feldman. But alas, we have me today, and I'll certainly do whatever I can to go through the questions. I'm happy if you want to pick them at random, though, Stuart. I might be joined by my glamorous assistant shortly, so she might even chime in a couple of times as well.
Let me start at the top of the list then. It's come in from Leslie Pollock, and I'll read it out to you. With the rise of LGBTQ and increases in the number of people having gender realignment, what is the United Synagogue's position on the status of such people? For example, a woman who has transitioned to a man, do they sit in the men's section of the shul? Could they have an aliyah, and should they wear tefillin? Similarly, what is the position of a man who has transitioned to a woman? Again, is he obliged still to wear tefillin, tallis and tefillin, or not? So we started you off with an easy one, Rabbi.
Thank you. Let's dive straight in. First of all, it really is so worth pointing out that we shouldn't be afraid of asking questions in Judaism. I'm sure that comes as absolutely no surprise to any of us, but I do know that some people feel occasionally that there are certain types of questions that you just shouldn't ask a rabbi. It's not respectful to ask these questions. There are some times when we have questions and we feel like, oh, well, I know I shouldn't have these questions, and people feel guilty for having questions. I think it's really, really important, something that we all believe in. As speaking on behalf of the rabbinic team in Bushy, people should always feel comfortable to ask questions. So even if there are more things that come up today, even if there are more occasions after the Q&A session today, always feel comfortable to ask questions. And there's no such thing as a bad question either, because if it's something that we are grappling with and trying to understand, then we should always feel like we have a safe space to ask those questions. So this is a very safe space, and this is a very good question. So thank you, Leslie, and thank you to Daphne for putting this right at the top of the list. It is a very sensitive topic, and as a rabbinate, we do often discuss these issues, and one has to be. I actually sat with Rabbi Feldman just to make sure that anything that I was wanting to say, especially on this issue, was something that is consistent with the approach by the chief rabbi, and I think that's an important caveat over here. First and foremost, let's actually tackle the question instead of just talking around the question. Let's actually tackle the question now. The United Synagogue position on the status of people having undergoing gender realignment, or people who identify as genders that perhaps are not their natural biological gender at birth. So first and foremost, it really does pay to mention the most important thing to understand is we as Orthodox Jews should always have a sensitive outlook on how people self-identify. That has to be at the crux of everything. The chief rabbi brought out guidelines, was it a year or nearly 2 years ago maybe now, which was designed as a curriculum or as a framework for schools to be able to operate from when it comes to dealing with students falling into the LGBTQ+ camp. And of paramount importance is the sensitivity and the understanding to support people, to be sensitive to people, and to give our time, to give our respect, to give our tolerance, to give our patience when people are trying to find their way within the Orthodox world and grapple with these very important issues. So that I think is number one. As a United Synagogue, we are welcoming to people who identify in these ways. We are welcoming in the sense that we are not judgmental and do not turn people away. They do not, now have to be ejected and rejected from the camp. So that, I believe, is an important starting point for us to all understand. For some people, that's a hard thing. For some people, that is a hard thing to appreciate, that we shouldn't be judging and imposing our own biases and imposing our own feelings. We have to, as a Jewish people, be sensitive and reach out and be accepting for people who contend with these issues. So that's first and foremost. We asked the question as well as to where they should sit. Can they have an aliyah? Can they wear tefillin, etc., etc. So to broadly deal with these as well. When it comes to the actual seating allocations, let's take that as an example. When it comes to the actual seating allocations, so that will be for a person who, however they are identifying, then within the United Synagogue, we give the people the right to that self-expression. So if a person who may have been born biologically with the gender of a male and wishes to now identify as a female, so within the United Synagogue, we will allow them to sit in the ladies section, and vice versa. When it comes to the actual giving of mitzvot, so then it does become a little more complicated. The position of the United Synagogue would be that the status of a gender does not change when it comes to the public performance of ritual and public performance of mitzvot. So while a woman identifying as a man would be permitted to sit in the men's section, we wouldn't give such an individual an aliyah, and so there is still understandably that can be something that would be of potential upset to people in that position. But again, within all of these situations and with all of these frameworks that we're working from, the important thing is to find ways of navigating these situations with sensitivity, with tolerance. But when it comes to the actual performance of public ritual, then there is that guideline that we can't really breach in that sense. Interesting.
Okay.
Oh,
sorry, go on.
Was my time up?
Well, I do want to get in. We've got quite a lot of questions. I do want to get them all, but I want you to sort of fully answer. Okay,
well, we can always, hopefully, towards the end, if people want to come back with further questions and
indeed
challenges, then they can.
I'm sure that's a subject all on its own if we wanted to. So yeah. Okay, I have one here, and it's come in anonymously, but let me read it to you. Back at the beginning of September, when all the Yom Tovim started, the inability to be surrounded by our children and grandchildren was devastating for us all. The meaning of Yom Tov, the memories of our childhoods, the stories related about our parents, the teaching the youngest generation of all our past years were gone. What was needed was some semblance of past Yom Tov services, which were not available in the diminished service provided for by the shul. There were very many of us who accepted the situation, but took solace and comfort in the services provided by other forms of synagogues. And I know Reforms had online services. I'm fully aware of the Orthodox point of view. However, with hindsight, do you think that in this 21st century, the use of modern technology, which is available, would have given us so much more comfort, so many which was not achieved by the restrictive services the shul offered, and did nothing to serve a community who could not, even if they wanted to, get to shul? quite a sensitive subject, but Rabbi, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. It is an extremely sensitive subject, and I think that we all were grappling with this in different ways, and appreciating just how important these times are for people to spend as families, and to be able to be comforted by the feelings of familiarity, the feelings of regularity, the feelings of trying to resume service as much as was possible. It was especially in those opening weeks and months, it was extremely challenging for people, especially with Pesach approaching. And I can certainly appreciate that people felt extremely conflicted and felt extremely challenged. And while we made every attempt we possibly could to make sure that people did not feel let down, one can't escape the fact that there will have been people that just simply felt let down, and people who just simply felt that however much we tried to engage and tried to find ways and avenues within the Orthodox framework of allowing things to happen, we cannot discount the fact that for some people it just didn't cut the mustard. The kosher for Pesach mustard, of course. So we again, oftentimes we have to start from a point of sensitivity and appreciate where people were coming from. That being said, the challenge and the opportunities that were presented to us, as with a lot of situations, is the ongoing question, and it touches on some of the other questions that have come through in advance as well, which is how does one express modernity? How does one embrace modernity while at the same time preserving the tradition? So I recognize that this question asks a very specific topic, but it does pay for us to explore it from a broad context as well. The question in any responsible rabbi's lap, when it the details and the contents will always vary, but the question is always, how does one embrace modernity while at the same time preserving tradition? Within Orthodox Judaism and within modern Orthodox Judaism, that is always the challenge with any of these questions, which is that there's something that we want to do, or something that we want to embrace, or something that we want to include within our lives, and we are turning to our rabbinic figures to help us understand whether this is something that I can include within my Jewish practice and something which I can include within my Jewish ritual, or whether it's something that I have to avoid. So one has to appreciate that that is always the dilemma with any of these questions. And the questions, I am presupposing that we're talking about Zoom services taking place on Shabbos, being able to sit at Zoom Seders with our children on Shabbos, on Pesach. That lies at the heart of the particulars of this particular anonymous question. But what the essence of the question is would embracing a Zoom service on Shabbat or on Yom Tov or at a Seder, whatever it might be, is that an example of a place where I can embrace modernity without breaking with the tradition, and which enables us to preserve the tradition? And the view of the chief rabbi and the view of the London Bet Din was that in these circumstances, utilizing technology like Zoom on Shabbat, on Yom Tov, would do us damage in the long term when it comes to preserving the tradition than it would be to be able to express and embrace that particular modernization. One should realize that throughout the last 100 years, with the 100+ years, but with the invention of electricity, telephone, televisions, fax machines, at every step of the way, all of these technological innovations will have been tackled and grappled with as to whether these were things that we can utilize or not. So we are privileged in a way to live through a period of time where we see the technological questions unfolding before our very eyes, But the further you go back, we'll see that all of these questions were huge questions at the time. In this particular example, to be able to conduct Zoom services on Shabbat is something that is not straightforward within the halachic parameters of Shabbat. And as a result of that, the advice of the chief rabbi, the London Bet Din, was to not permit it.
Okay, thank you. I think, you know, we are all extremely grateful, at least, for what you do provide. I mean, it's tremendous. If you go back a year, we never had any of these Zoom services, be it prior to Shabbos, of an evening, of an afternoon, of a morning. I think it's tremendous in terms of what is available to us. I don't know, somebody's just come on. That's better, thank you. So we are very grateful, Rabbi, to our rabbinic team for what is provided, but I suppose for some of us it doesn't quite make up for being in shul itself or being able to get into a Shabbos service, but thanks for that explanation.
Right. I'd like to say just one other thing as well, which is that, you know, I think we have to also give due credit for everybody that faced up to these challenges. And I think we all have to give ourselves a pat on the back for dealing with what were very difficult circumstances. I think that the courage, the bravery, I think that even to ask these questions takes a level of courage. And I think it's just admirable and fantastic that people wanted to ask the question. I really do.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on now to a question from Judge Shlomo Kryman. I know he's on today, but I'm sure he won't want to have his say on this, but let me read out the question. Every year after Sukkot, we recommence the reading of the Torah, the first 5 books in Tanakh. This process has gone on for centuries. Isn't it time to look wider at the vast store of rabbinic literature and move on? For example, the other books in Tanakh are largely ignored, Haftarahs accepted, and could be arranged for regular study of a few chapters every Shabbos morning. Following the arrival of COVID-19, many Rabbonim have looked outside the box in an innovative and constructive way. This will be a further opportunity to take a step in that direction.
No one said these questions were going to be easy. I speak for myself solely on this occasion because I didn't get the chance necessarily to discuss what Rabbi Feldman's feelings would be on this. There's 2 elements to this. On the one hand, there seems to be at the heart of this question of a question of, you know, are we doing enough to really embrace the full literature that we have available? And, you know, we were talking before about Rabbi Sachs, Zichrono Livracha. You know, he really had a mastery over so many areas of Torah literature. He was absolutely phenomenal to be able to produce the works to the level of wisdom and competence and confidence that he did. That takes a lot of study, and it takes a certain mindset to really embrace the entire depth and breadth of the literature that we have available to us. On the other hand, there's an element here in the question of, well, maybe we should adapt our Shabbat morning service to therefore broaden and include these things. It's interesting, really, because if you look back at history, we didn't used to have an annual cycle of the reading of the Torah. It was actually split over 3 years, and the Torah reading each week was considerably shorter. The innovation of including Haftarah in a Shabbat service came at times of persecution. We weren't allowed to have public reading of the Torah, and so instead we identified passages in the prophets that encapsulated the themes of a particular parasha, and that became the norm for a significant amount of time. And since there was no public reading of the Torah, people read the Haftarah instead, so that it paid homage to the themes of a particular week's Torah reading. So there have been times where things have where things have adapted, and actually not we as in me, but the rabbis of yesteryear decided to preserve and retain the Haftarah in a weekly Shabbat service, despite the fact that we didn't really need it anymore. Perhaps one of the reasons is, as Judge Kryman was alluding to, is the need to have wider study than just the Torah. My feelings personally on this is that there should be nothing that stops us from delving deeper and wider in our own personal learning. Part of the challenges that I've gone through over the last few months is figuring out how to empower people and how to give to people when they don't have the usual format of a shul service to rely on. There's so much to Judaism. There's 90% of Jewish practice takes place outside of shul, but we've always been so focused on the 3-hour whatever window of a Shabbat morning. But there's so much more Torah to learn. There's so much more to experience outside of that 3-hour window. So I think the challenge lies both ways, really. There is so much to learn. I can see just on the list of people here today that I have discussed on several occasions, the different potential options that we can have, the different classes that we can have, and we've tried to provide these online as best as we can. And I think it comes a point where people who want to engage with additional Torah learning, we're here. Just let us know, we'll set it up. We have a weekly Mishnah share, a weekly Mishnah class. We have a weekly Talmud class. We have weekly Lunch and Learn. Amazing opportunity to plug that, 12 o'clock on a Thursday, which is amazing and so deep and broad, the discussions that we have on Lunch and Learn at 12 o'clock on a Thursday. We have our Wednesday night sessions as well. I'll take a quick opportunity to plug that. You can't stop me, Stuart. Starting tomorrow night, 8:30 p.m, we're going to have 4 weeks, 4 amazing speakers, 4 amazing life stories. We've got the first female Hasidic circuit court judge speaking tomorrow night. Really encourage everyone to come on for that. Stage is another example where we expand our minds and we expand our horizons, and we realize that there is more to learn than just a few hours on a Shabbat morning. So it's there for us. It's so accessible. These resources are available all over the internet, all over the Jewish bookshops in English, much easier to understand than they will have been 30, 40, 50 years ago. And I think the teaching styles have adapted, not just because of COVID. I think if you compare Cheder teachers and Jewish studies teachers, Kodesh teachers, community rabbis, community educators, that has evolved in such an amazingly positive way than the experiences that people might have had in their childhood many moons ago. It's all there. It's all waiting for us, and come join us.
Thank you. Free advertising for you there, Rabbi.
Yeah, there we go.
Just to reinforce again, what an amazing program that Bushy Short offers to its members. So come and join us. Right, let me give you an easy one now, because you've had a couple of tough ones. From Leslie Daniels. What has been the most difficult thing you've had to face during lockdown, and how have you addressed it?
Ooh.
I thought that was easy.
Well, I'm going to take this as a personal question, and I'm going to answer very, very personally.
Yeah.
Not everything is about shul. And I think the most difficult thing that I have faced during lockdown is myself. I can't, credit to Shira, she has to live with me, poor girl. But one of the most difficult things has been trying to be consistent and try and be consistently better. Lockdown gave us the unique opportunity to spend more time as a family. It gave me more opportunity to not have to go to bed at silly o'clock every single night. And I think that one of the most difficult things has been trying to adjust. And I've been trying to do this for years, but COVID was a good impetus. Lockdown was a good springboard for this, which is that I need to rein myself in a bit, and not work till all hours of the night, spend more time with Shira, spend more time with my children, and lockdown really forced that on me, and it's been an amazing opportunity, and for a couple of days here and there I was really successful, and that's the most difficult thing. Remaining calm as well throughout all of that is a big challenge. So Leslie, it's a wonderful question. How have I addressed it? So it's an ongoing challenge every single day. I haven't yet reached the point of true calm. I haven't yet reached the ability to be consistent every single night and to not get carried away with work. But life is all about the journey, isn't it?
It is indeed. I think my wife might underline what you're saying about staying calm, but she's sitting here in the background, so I better move on quickly on that. All right. Okay. I've got one here from Jeffrey Zemmel. We are taught that both the oral and written law was handed down on the mountain directly from Hashem. In that case, why have rabbis over the centuries discussed the oral law and amended it to suit? For example, we are specifically instructed that an animal cannot be cooked in its mother's milk, yet that has been amended to distinguish between milk and meat, and in modern terms to separate separate dishwashers, etc. Why? Gosh, there's a challenge.
A nice, easy one. How does one encapsulate into a couple of minutes the entire breadth and depth of the oral law? So yeah, it is something that actually took me a long time to really understand myself. When we say that the Jewish people stood at Mount Sinai, 3 million people, all experiencing the miracles, all experiencing hearing God's voice, 3 million people. We don't necessarily even appreciate how many people there were. I did a Q&A, I did 3 Q&A back-to-back sessions with Sinai School yesterday, the year 6 students. And I asked them how many people do they think stood at Mount Sinai, and people don't necessarily appreciate. We're taught that there were 600,000 people that came out of Egypt, but that's only the men aged 20 to 60. So you have to double that for the women, and you have to add more on for the children and more on for the people over the age of 60. So we're looking at 3 million people experiencing a divine revelation at Mount Sinai, which by the way is the reason why we're able to trace a chain of tradition all the way back to Mount Sinai. Every single teacher, rabbi of every generation, we're able to trace it all the way back up, which is an amazing achievement in and of itself. But here's the point. They received the Torah and they received the oral law. What that means is that they learned everything the way it was supposed to be taught, from Moses, from Aaron, from Joshua, from the elders. It all got passed down. And so what we sometimes see now is a bit disjointed and a bit confusing, and why is it like this and why is it like that? Back in the day, right, that was the explanation of it. If you take the written Torah in its just on its own, okay, even if you take the laws of kashrut on its own. So you're right, Jeffrey, we're taught that we're not supposed to cook an animal in its mother's milk. We're actually told that 3 times in the Torah. The same words, lo tevashel gadi b'chalev imo, that we shouldn't cook a kid in its mother's milk. All right. So why do we need to be told that 3 times? So if you were living at the time of Moses, it would have been clear. One is to teach us that we can't cook a kid in its mother's milk. One is to teach us that we can't eat meat that was prepared in that way. And one is to teach us that we can't derive benefit from things that have been prepared in that kind of way. It's the same few words, but there are layers and layers of meaning that will have been clear thousands of years ago. It's just now we're so far down the line that for us we're like breaking our heads over what all of these words mean. It was one and the same. You know, we're taught that we have, we know that we have to wear tefillin that have to be black, and they have to be boxes, and they have to have straps. It doesn't mention that anywhere in the Torah. It just says that you should bind them to your arm and you should bind them between your eyes. That's all it tells us. It's only because of the oral law, it's only because of the way in which the teachers taught that we understand what tefillin are supposed to look like. And there's countless other examples as well. Lulav and etrog. It says it in the Torah that you have to take a pre-Eitz Hadar. It doesn't say anywhere that you have to have an etrog. So all of these things were known and taught and clearly revealed at the same time at Mount Sinai. And we're just kind of picking up the pieces thousands of years later, trying to dig at the scraps to try and understand how it all links together. So when it comes to how it all filters down, that will have all been a process that was very obvious and very easy to comprehend as time went on, because we were taught by Moses these very things. It wasn't just that we were given this book and like, okay, guys, here you go, figure it out. This was all given to us as well. And as the years have gone on and we've become further and further and further away from that source, so it becomes a very complicated process for us to understand it. But things that were taught at Mount Sinai, they were taught about black boxes with straps. They were taught about what kind of things are okay to cook together and what kind of things are not okay to cook together or eat together, or how long to wait, etc., etc. So as time goes on, it becomes harder to study those things, but it's all emet, it's all truth. Now, as you said, we didn't have dishwashers back in the day. So again, we rely on our Torah educators to take the precedents and to take the procedures, the mechanisms of learning. We trust our Torah educators, who are experts in these fields, to take the precedents and apply them to novel situations, in the same way that we trust any judge in any legal system to take a legal precedent and apply it in a new and novel way. And what we were alluding to before about needing to see the broader picture is that when it comes to details of halacha, the minutiae of halacha, there are very big considerations that have to be taken into account, which is why we can end up with somewhat obscure situations and odd rituals and odd methods of practice that don't make complete sense to us, but we are blessed to have had a strong heritage and a strong chain of Torah educators to help us with that. One other thing that I was going to say as well is I've forgotten what I was going to say as well.
Don't worry, Rabbi. I'm conscious of wanting to get through these questions, and I think you gave Jeffrey enough information on that one. Thank you.
We won't give you your second one though, Jeffrey. So
well, let's see. One here from Ronnie Levine. Okay. Why do Kharedim in Israel, the USA and parts of North London not realise or care that their actions against the rules in place of COVID-19 goes against the most important tenet of the Jewish religion, namely the sanctity of life? Do they not understand or care that they are putting the lives of their Haredi friends, families, rabbis, and others at risk? What do you think about their thought processes? Are that justify them having large weddings, mass celebrations, and keeping schools opened when the law tells them not to? I've probably got 3 or 4 more others, Rabbi, and I'd like to get these in and give some time for questions. So
okay,
I'll leave you to keep it as brief as you can, please.
Oh,
well, okay.
Perfect question to keep brief. I struggled to come up certainly with a concise answer for this one. We find ourselves in very difficult times, and we can't help but notice when people are not adhering to the rules. One of the reasons why I struggled with this is because I see it across all camps, across all faiths. You just have situations, pockets of people who do not follow the rules. I do think it is very pertinent to point out that while we see the examples of Kharadi Jews who don't follow the rules, there is a huge, staggering number of people that do follow the rules. So I really do want to take care to point that out. What we're not seeing is an entire Kharadi Hasidic community who, without exception, are violating the rules. there are, you could argue that the majority do stick to the rules. I also struggle with this because I've seen examples within our own community, and I've seen examples of people from other communities and other faiths and other religions. They're just not sticking to the rules. I struggle with that as well. Shira and I have really tried to be extremely careful with everything that we've done over these last few months. So I really don't think it's necessarily fair to categorize it as the entire Kharadi population, and I hope others will agree with me. That being said, I also can't read minds. I struggle with this because I feel that people should be held to a higher standard, especially if they identify in a way that that would, from the outside, lead us to think that people are holding themselves to very high standards. So I struggle with that as well. And I can't really answer for people. There are some things that we can appreciate and think about. One is there an issue there with the limited access that they might have to education, or the limited access to the facts, the limited access to the science? One can wonder whether that's a component to it. One can wonder whether there are within that demographic, whether there is a sensitivity to threats, a sensitivity to when their public ritual or their ability to practice publicly is threatened, and whether there's a sensitivity over there. Ultimately, I can't answer for them. But I think that it's also unfair to paint it with a very broad brush, and I think that it's equally important for us to ask the questions of everyone, not just of one particular group.
Thank you, Rabbi. I think you're absolutely right to focus on right across the piece. As I drive through Bushy occasionally, and I see people sitting, when it was sunny, outside Toulouse Cafe, sitting gossiping with each other, tables close together, and I think, where does social distancing come in that? So perhaps I better move on quickly, otherwise I might get into trouble with, I know, some people who sit out there regularly. Right, Martin Davis has sent one in. In the companion guide for Rosh Hashanah, there is a section which lists 90 symbolic foods which are eaten. Why is the cow's lung included, and what does it represent?
I actually meant to ask you to take that one off, because I do not have a clue. I promise Martin that I will find an answer to this. I contacted Tribe. That was where he found this particular thing. I'd never heard of a cow's lung being one of the simanim, one of the symbolic foods that we eat on Rosh Hashanah. We eat a cow's tongue, and that's all to do with being the head of the year, and everything being afresh and getting off to a good start, and also because Shira doesn't like fish heads being on the table, being anywhere near the house at all. So, but a cow's lung in particular, I had not heard of, and when I contacted Tribe, they also said, what? So I'm going to find out if that was a mistake or whether there is something deeper to that. Okay,
thank you, Martin. Answer to follow in the post. Okay, one from Joy Alanek, a nice easy one for you. If you could be anywhere in the world right now, where would that be and why?
What if the answer's not Bushy, right?
Don't feel obliged.
Pardon me?
Don't feel obliged to say Bushy.
Don't feel obliged. Okay, well, in that case, I'll answer in the following way. We're certainly very blessed to live in Bushy. But certainly over these last few months, my heart has been pulling more and more and more to wishing that we could be in Israel. It's where a lot of our close family live. And you know, I think historically, whereas everyone would always say, oh yeah, sure, I'd love to move to Israel. I think that it's become more of a challenge for me. It's become more of a pull. But that being said, before we signed up to the position in Bushy, we always said in our interview that wherever we go, we devote ourselves, we commit ourselves to the community, and that's why you always see Shira and myself trying to work as hard as we possibly can to provide for our members. So you'll be pleased to know that there's currently no other place apart from Bushy that we would rather be. But if Israel had been or was as an option, perhaps in the long term, I think you'll probably find us heading over there at some point.
Right answer. I've got 2 more questions, and I would like to allow time for some Q&A. Does it matter to you if you run a bit after 3, or have you got to get away?
No, we're good.
Okay, well, let me carry on in that case. A second one from Leslie Pollock. Isn't the Hanukkah story a myth? There is no mention of a miracle with the oil in either the book of Maccabees and the Al-Hanisim prayer that we say on Hanukkah. Only talks about purifying the temple and lighting the candles in the courtyard. No mention about the menorah or the oil lasting 8 days. Isn't it a fabrication by the rabbis of the Talmud to try to whitewash what in effect was a civil war between Hellenized, Sadducee, forgive me if I haven't pronounced them correctly, Jews and the stricter Pharisee Jews? There's one for you.
There's a piece of cake. So maybe just to pad out a little bit of the context over there, the Hellenized Sadducee Jews were a sect of Jewish people who wanted to only take the written law as the starting point, and to not basically feel bound to the teachings of the oral law. Whereas the stricter Pharisee Jews, as Leslie refers to them, were, I guess, what you would call orthodoxy, trying to hold on to the traditions, trying to hold on to the heritage, to the chain of transmission, all the way from Moses at Mount Sinai, which, if you appreciate that we're talking about the temple times, is not actually that far away from the actual experience. Interestingly, by the way, Hanukkah always comes before Purim in the Jewish calendar, but Purim comes before Hanukkah in history, which we don't always necessarily realize. Purim was the in between the first and the second temples, and Hanukkah was during the time of the second temple. So fun fact, hey? So here's the thing. When we talk about Hanukkah, we all say, why do we have 8 days? And we say, oh, it's because the oil, it burned for 8 days. What does that mean? I don't know. Does that mean that it was 1 jug of oil and it lasted for 8 days? Or does it mean they put in an 8th each day and it lasted? There's loads of explanations about it. But the point is that Leslie's raising is, when you look at the book of Maccabees, which is in the Apocrypha, and it wasn't canonized into our Tanakh, into our Bible, it's not there. It doesn't mention the miracle of 8 days. Not only that, but when we say our Amida prayers, and when we bench during Hanukkah, and we say Al-Hanisim, a particular prayer which then goes on to talk about the Hanukkah story. So it talks about the victory of the mighty, of the few over the mighty, the Maccabees trying to stand up for what was right and stand up for against assimilation and to stand against Hellenization. So it would seem as follows, that from the point of view of the book of Maccabees, from the point of view of the rabbis compiling our prayer book, the focus really was about a small group of people overcoming the might of the Greeks, and the might of the corrosive impact that Hellenized Jews were having on society. So the real miracle really is the fact that we were able to hold on to what was authentic, hold on to what was real, hold on to what was emet, what was truth, even when we faced this massive army and this huge adversity. So the oil is interpreted as the kind of divine approval. But it didn't actually help with the defeat of the Greeks, which is why the focus is on the defeat of the Greeks rather than the oil, which was kind of Hashem demonstrating that he approved of the efforts to push away the assimilated Greek influences. So that does open another can of worms, which is, well, why then does the Talmud focus so heavily on the miracle of the oil? So, you know, that's another part of the question as well. But fundamentally, it's not just a fabrication by the rabbis of the Talmud to whitewash the civil war. We talk about the civil war, we do, and this is what I'm saying. Like we have to read, we have to study more and more and more, and really get to grips with all of it. So you know, it's easier to teach about the miracle. It's an easy bite-sized bit of information. You know, what someone says, okay, explain to me about Hanukkah. It's very easy to teach about the miracle of oil lasting for 8 days. It's very hard to teach about the fight for authentic Torah Judaism against a very corrosive, assimilated, Hellenized regime.
Okay, thank you. I suppose it's appropriate. The last one is also Hanukkah. Bear in mind, Hanukkah is a matter of a few weeks away now. So, second bite of the cherry for Jeffrey Zemmel. We are told that when the Maccabees retook the temple, they found a barrel of oil which would have been sufficient to kindle the 8 lights each day, but for 1 day only. The miracle is that this barrel lasted for 8 days, which gave them sufficient time to prepare further supplies of oil. As the usual practice was to light 8 candles per day, why do we begin with 1 and build up to 8 at Hanukkah? What happened to the candles per day?
Okay, so let's run through this. Let's run through this carefully. In the temple, in the Beit HaMikdash, there was a menorah which actually had 7 branches, not 8. So it had 7 branches, and they would light all 7 branches every day, every single day. And as we talked about briefly, or probably at great length, you'll tell me, the miracle was that this 7-branched menorah stayed alight for 8 days. By the way, if it hadn't done, that wouldn't have taken away from the miraculous victory at all. It just so happens, as we said, that Hashem seemed to indicate approval with what had happened through this particular miracle. When we light the Chanukiah, let's call it, so to avoid confusion, when we light the Chanukiah, we're lighting an 8-branched candelabra, because we are recognizing the 8 days of this miracle. And there's actually a dispute as to whether you start with 8 and go down to 1, or you start with 1 and go up to 8. And the law is in accordance with the opinion that you start with 1 on day 1 and you build to 8 on day 8. Very interesting thing, by the way. To fulfill the mitzvah of lighting Hanukkah candles, you only need to light 1 candle per household every day. 1 on day 1, 1 on day 2, 1 on day 3, 1 on day 4. You don't need to build it up. You only need to have 1 every single day. Then the next step up is, okay, well, we will have 1, I can't remember what the next step up. Whatever it is, the point is the best step up is for everybody to be lighting menorahs day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, counting up as we go along. And that's called Mahadrin Min HaMahadrin. What's amazing is that when you look at how most families operate for Hanukkah, everybody pitches themselves at the highest possible level, which is an amazing thing, because when it comes to all other minhagim, halachot, rituals, practice during the year, so people do things in different ways and different levels and different stages, but when it comes to Hanukkah, we all seem to take this very, very high level of ritual, which is an amazing thing.
Thank you. Actually, there is one more question that Rita Hammerman sent in, but I think you partly answered it earlier on when talking about services during Shabbos, whatever. But what she says, and you might just want to add to what you've already said, as COVID may last for some years, we hope not, but anyway, as COVID may last for some time, do you think that the shul may have to change the way it operates?
So I think the only thing that I will add in is as follows. As I've said, you know, when it comes to embracing the need for change versus the need for preserving, one always has to be mindful of the long-term impact of any decisions that we make. And that's why we have a bet din, and that's why we have a chief rabbi to turn to. What I will say is this, because I think it's a way of including everybody in this particular challenge. You know, the way that I look at it is as follows. There's the circle. There's the circle of Jewish life, let's call it. And we want everybody to feel a part of that circle. And we want to be as welcoming as we possibly can. Now, there's two ways you can do that. One way is to make the circle extremely appealing and extremely attractive so that everybody is drawn to it and everyone wants to be a part of that circle. The alternative is that you just expand what the circle means so that now everybody is a part of that circle. So when I talk about, you know, the dilution of Jewish values, the dilution of Jewish heritage, of tradition, right? That could be an example of where we're making the circle big enough so that everyone feels a part of it, but then we might have lost what we were trying to hold on to with the circle. And what I think it's everybody's responsibility, not just the rabbinic team of the shul. I think it's everybody's responsibility to try and bring as many people as we can into our circle, the community, make people feel welcome, make people feel loved, make people feel that it's a place that we want to be a part of. And I think that's everybody's responsibility ultimately, that we should all be trying to reach out in whatever way we can, spread our love, spread our warmth, spread our light, and make people really feel part of it.
Good point to finish on there. Thank you, Rabbi. Okay, let's take a few minutes. I'm sure there's people burning to ask questions of you. So I'll leave you to jump in and Ronnie to try and identify you. So
you're going off for lunch and you're just going to leave me to the,
absolutely.
to the predators.
Time to put the kettle on now, so I need to go. So not really. So shall we just limit this to 10 minutes, Rabbi, so you can go? Is that okay with you?
With pleasure.
Okay, go on, whoever wants to go first. Take yourself off mute.
Done it. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Rabbi,
say who you are.
Anne Kasler.
Hello, Anne.
Hello. I have two grandchildren who plan to marry in Israel this year with a civil ceremony beforehand. Well, of course, with COVID, that's totally gone by the board. So it's the Israeli section is planned for next year, hopefully. And one of them decided to have the civil ceremony now. And they had that a couple of weeks ago when they were lucky enough to have 30 people there, as opposed to, I'm not even sure how many it is now. Is that totally not recognizable, the civil ceremony in Jewish law?
What do you mean by is it not totally recognizable?
I mean, would it be a sanctioned union, or would they not be married? Would the Beth Din not consider them marriage just by civil ceremony in a registry office?
But what are we driving at over here? What do you want them to be able to recognize it for? To then not need to have a chuppah at some other time?
Yes, yes.
It's a very good question. My understanding is that for the intents and purposes of achieving kiddushin, which is the name that we give to the marriage ceremony, which binds the two souls together, which we do under a chuppah. So my understanding is that will only be achieved if they have the ceremony of kiddushin, of a ceremony under a chuppah with the brachot, with the ketubah, with the whole shebang. That's all part of the religious ceremony that binds the two souls together. Please God, by the way, in health and happiness for many years. It's difficult to know what the particular ramifications of one without the other would be, and could be you have specific examples, but vis-a-vis the ketubah, vis-a-vis the ceremony and all of that, I would imagine we need to be having the ceremony of Kiddushin as well.
Can I ask something, Rabbi, while it's coming up, because it's relevant?
One moment, Nova. Does Anne have anything to follow up?
Yeah.
Sorry?
Did you have anything that you wanted to follow up on?
Well, yeah, I mean, hopefully they will have the Jewish wedding, for the want of a better description, and hopefully in Israel, but who knows?
Okay.
Please God, and please God, everybody.
Subsequently heard from somebody that if you get married in Israel, you don't need a civil ceremony here. But that's the first time I've ever heard that.
That's what happened with myself and Shira. We got married in Israel, and we had to have different things signed off over here. But we had the chuppah ceremony and everything in Israel. We got a marriage certificate through the Israeli rabbinate, and that just had to be ratified in England.
What does that mean, ratified?
I don't know. It's 10 years ago now. We had to send it off somewhere, and then it got the seal of approval from
the Queen.
England. Yeah, the Queen.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Backed it up.
Nova, I think you wanted to come in.
Yes, I was prevented from getting married in shul because my Bernie's first wife wouldn't accept the get. So I spent 28 years I got married in a registry office, but I've had a shul wedding now. I had it after, 28 years after that. So I'm now kosher, but before that I wasn't.
Oh, you're always kosher, Nova.
Recognized.
I remember my grandma, Alaa Shalom, told me about your unique situation. I didn't fully understand what it meant that she refused to give the get.
She wouldn't accept it.
Okay, fair enough. But yeah, Mazel Tov anyway. And
I did have a lovely ceremony afterwards, a proper shul wedding. So
good.
Oh, Hashem.
All's well that ends well, eh? Okay. So anybody else out there?
Yes, I'm always in a state of confusion.
Sorry, who's speaking?
Henry.
It's Henry.
Oh, hello, Henry. Go on.
I'm always in a state of confusion, and I want to ask the Rabbi about his answer to question 1, question 2, and the last question, because I think we're all in a state of the virus and trying to Zoom. Now, it's giving an opportunity to bring people in who would be on the fringe, right? So I can't understand really why we can't have services on Zoom. I can't understand why, if we have a minyan on Zoom, people can't say Kaddish, right?
Mm.
The second part is, your answer was that tradition has it, things can't be altered. Yet you went on in question 2, where we have had a traditional change insofar as when we couldn't read from the Torah, we managed to institute Torah, right? Then coming right on to the end, you said the whole point was to bring as many people in as possible. Now, I would have thought the ability to Zoom services would have brought more people in, brought them in to the fold. At the moment, as we heard, some of them go to Reform because they're doing Zoom services on Zoom. I don't know how you, I'm not really asking you to answer it. I'm just saying how confused a lot of us are on this particular topic. Let's face it, who put the virus there in the first place? We don't know. But someone also provided us with Zoom to overcome it. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Henry.
I think what I'll say to Henry is this. First of all, Henry, a big shout out to Henry, because as much as he says that we can't have a service over Zoom. He somehow manages every single day to join the service via Zoom. And my hat's off to you, sir, because you're there long before I am in the morning. So a big hat tip to you there. I think if it's confusing to you, it's also confusing to all of us. As with any field of knowledge, there are experts, and the danger is that I remember when I joined Bushy, Diane Gelly hadn't really heard of me, and he just wanted to check for himself that I'm not some kind of like maverick guy that's going to come in and start trying to introduce all kinds of novel things that are going to cause him big problems down the line. I have a qualification that enables me to have the title of Rabbi, but I'm nowhere near as accomplished and nowhere near an expert as Dayan Gelly, as the chief rabbi, as the other Dayanim on the London Bet Din. In the same way that you can have somebody with doctor before his name, but he might not be as much of a specialist as other people also with doctor before their name. So the way that I look at it is as follows. I trust my experts, and as I was mentioning before, when they are dealing with a question, they're not just trying to think, okay, is this going to bring people in or not? But they're trying to think about the long-term ramifications of the questions that are being presented to them. So when it's a case of, do we just let life resume as normal? Let's pretend for a moment that there were no complications halachically to have Zoom on Shabbat, right? They might still feel it's just not appropriate, because fast forward a couple of years, now nobody wants to come to shul because everybody's just quite content being on Zoom. I don't know. So on the one hand, there might be things that are permitted within halacha, but they just might not be appropriate to allow, or might not be appropriate to allow in the way in which people are thinking will be good, because it might be good for the short term, but it might not be good for the long term. So there's always this balance when it comes to when to say yes and when to say no. The danger of not thinking these things through properly is that as time progresses, we all of a sudden see a side effect that nobody would have ever thought of. But that's why we trust the experts in the field to weigh up all of the repercussions, all the possible ramifications, and then to proceed based on that foresight. We're taught in Pirkei Avot, who is a wise person, someone who is able to see the consequences of their decisions. So sometimes the answer can be permitted within halacha, but it still might not be appropriate to do it because of the repercussions that other people might not predict and might not foresee. There was something else that I wanted to say, but the other thing that I wanted to say is, again, if you want an answer, maybe go and ask a real rabbi like Rabbi Feldman, but the way that I look at the particular issue of having a minyan on Zoom or doing anything by Zoom, when it comes to things like prayer, or specifically prayer in a minyan, there are spiritual side effects to the mitzvot that we do, to any action, to any mitzvah, to anything that we do. There's always a spiritual effect, right? When it comes to the spiritual effect of prayer in a minyan, for whatever reason, and I'm not claiming that I have the mystical wisdom to understand it, but the proximity of at least 10 individuals standing in the same space, in the same physical space, achieves something spiritually that is not achieved through Zoom. And there's a challenge really in all of this, is to appreciate that the mitzvot that we do, whether it's Kaddish, whether it's prayer, whether it's a wedding ceremony, there are spiritual things happening at all of these times that are also being taken into consideration. And because we don't see it, and because it's not tangible, and because it's not physical, and all of the rest of it, so it becomes very difficult for us to comprehend. But that also lies as a consideration for a lot of these different things.
Would 3 people be considered a mazumin? Would 3 people be considered a mazumin?
A mazumin.
Sorry.
Hold you to.
Can I ask a question now?
Just one, hang on. Can you make it quick? Because I think
Yes.
we've Rabbi,
Just to say, with regard to the wishes of some people that things could be changed rather than tradition, over Pesach, certain things were allowed which were not allowed before from the point of view of food, etc., of the buying. Don't you think that's going to change in years to come as well?
Who knows? As always, I will leave it. Listen, I'm in a very fortunate position because I can always just say, like, I leave it to the chief rabbi. Who knows? No, nobody's coming to me for these questions. We're then going to the rabbi. So I'm happy to leave it in their capable hands.
An interesting point, Marion. One a lot of us ask of other people and question, but who are we to question sometimes?
Exactly.
But,
exactly.
Yeah. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you so much for this afternoon. It's been most interesting, most informative, and most enjoyable. Maybe we can do it again sometime if you're willing to put yourself through it. It's been, thank you for your time, and thank you to the whole rabbinic team for all you do for the community, and no doubt continue to do. It's so much appreciated, because for so many of us, we miss being in shul itself, but we avail ourselves as much as possible of all the offerings that you give us so diligently, week in and week out. So thank you for that. Right, just a couple of things from me before we finish. Don't forget, we now have Thursdays at 2 o'clock as well for current affairs. I believe Jeffrey Zemmel is hosting it this week. Don't forget Sunday, Mitzvah Day. Sage is running the showtime tea time at 3:30. Have your cup of tea and piece of cake ready and get into the shows. I don't doubt there'll be some sing-alongs. And next week's program, same time, same place. Delighted that we'll have Ronnie and Joy back for one of their music appreciations called A Flying Start. A concert full of beginnings from Bernstein to Offenbach. So look forward to next Tuesday with Joy and Ronnie. Otherwise, good afternoon. Have a good rest of the week, and probably see some of you on Thursday. Take care.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Daphne here. Thank you very, very much, Rabbi Nick. It was great.